community of Walker's St. Andrew is known to be a tranquil and picturesque community. It exudes the kind of beauty that only those on vacation could imagine. Edward Hunt tells us of a time when this beautiful and unspoilt land could hardly be enjoyed by those whose navel string is buried here.
Walker's was and is a quiet place. Everybody knew everybody. You know, we had family, friends, we had relatives not far from us. My father had two brothers that owned property in the area. But let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the youngest of 9 children. All of us grew up in a close-knit household. When I came of age, most of my siblings had joined the migration from Barbados, as a lot of young people from that era would have done. They migrated to either England, Canada, or the United States. So I grew up mainly with a brother and a sister. I had a special needs brother. He also lived there with my parents. Walker's, as I said, was a close-knit community, very quiet, you know. People generally got along. It's very picturesque. There's a lot of, at least when I grew up, everybody had their own land. Everybody grew sugarcane. There's lots of hills in the area. I remember growing up in there with my brother, my elder brother. And when you went up in the hills, you saw the countryside. You know, it was very, very, very beautiful. You know, I have very early memories of that. Have very early memories of youngsters. They were older than me playing cricket in the road. There was a spot of land owned by some relatives, and sometimes the guys in the area would go up there and play cricket the whole Sunday afternoon. So it was a pretty close-knit community. When my mother was a young girl, those days were quite difficult. It was really, really hard. I don't think Barbadians I don't think that has been transmitted enough in our history, that information, what the plight of the working class was back then. It was, from what my parents told me, it was really, really difficult. You can imagine an adolescent child being forced, having to go and pick pond grass and working in the third class gang and having a driver like back in when they had slavery. You know, young children working for next to nothing, and people got very, very little. I remember looking back at the ancestry, the family tree. Barbadians of my parents' generation, they were probably amongst the first in the 1940s from rural Barbados to in any way own significant plots of land. My family moved to Walker's in 1949, right? At the time, plantation was being cut up, divided up, and being sold to smallholders. So these were would have been young people. My parents would have been young people back then, in their late 20s or early 30s, and would have been among the first to own land to any significant degree. And that was a big thing back then, because land is wealth, and to own property, it gives you have access to financing. You can use it as security to build a home, to educate your children, to even feed your family, you know, because you could grow provisions on the land and that kind of thing. So it was very, very, very important. Life was very difficult. People saved like nobody's business to buy a piece of land, to get a piece of, right? And when I reflect on what my parents told me in terms of how difficult life was for them when they were young, because these are people who had very little education, barely had primary school education. So education was seen as a privilege, not as a right. In the country, there's a lot of things to eat, a lot of fruits. Virtually every house had a mango tree, guava tree, salsa, grapefruit tree, any fruit you could find, you know, you could get there. So you never went hungry. They had coconut trees on my parents' property, but they didn't know this, so we go and climb a coconut tree, cut off a bunch of coconuts and bring them home. I mean, I guess they would know that I would have done it, but they never saw me do it, right? My mother's heart, if she had it, would be in her hand if she saw me do it. But I remember climbing a lot of coconut trees and cutting off bunches of coconuts, dropping them on the ground, bringing them home, cutting them open, drinking the coconut water, which I don't pick coconuts so much, but I still drink plenty of coconut water and jelly. I still enjoy that. I mean, my mother was a hawker, so the produce of the land, we would have banana trees. You know, she would take them to town. Sometimes, when it was a small child, actually, my father wasn't working, so I know things were tight. So she took up the slack then. She started selling produce to the land and that sort of thing in the Cheapside market. And I used to go with, when I became of age, when I was a teenager, I would go with her and help her with the produce, putting them on the bus, going to town with her. When I bought my first car, then I would be taking her to town and bringing her back home. And that happened even after I got married. And she did that well into her 70s. And she wasn't the only woman that did that. There were a lot of women who, from the immediate area, who were hawkers, who raised families doing that. Some of them were single women, a lot of them weren't married. So that's how females, you know, asserted their independence. So they small micro business women, and there are quite a few people who used to do that. I don't know. When I go in the market, I hear a lot of foreign accents. I'm not saying that as a bad thing, but there are less Barbadians doing that now compared to when I was a boy. Right? And it's a lot of people don't realize that it was a good means to make a living. You know, people would grow things like pigeon peas, pick them, shell them, carry them to town. You won't be going into the supermarket to buy a can of peas. You'll go and get freshly picked peas off the tree, you know, and that would be your Sunday meal. So even now, I'm a grown man, I study a lot of ground provisions, right? That's what I grew up eating. The homes were pretty self-sufficient. Most people didn't do, a supermarket would have been unknown to most people. I mean, yeah, I knew what a supermarket was. My mother was a hawker, so I would go to town with her and I would go into a supermarket with her to buy some items. But most homes were reasonably self-sufficient. If you didn't have, you could go across at a neighbor and get milk. Somebody would, you know, engage a pig, you know what and they would say, well, yeah, put me down for £5 and that kind of thing. So by the time the pig is slaughtered, you know, the carcass cut up, the meat is distributed, you collect your money. So who didn't kill a pig had a sheep or a couple of sheep slaughtered, you know, that kind of thing, you know. It was that most people knew knew about animal husbandry, from the smallest child to the oldest person. I remember taking sheep out to stake them out, tie them out, take water to them, bring home a cow all by myself. You can imagine an 8-year-old kid taking up a cow and bringing it, walking it home. That was me. So yeah, and I think too, it taught you responsibility from a very early age. You see a lot of children play with PlayStation portables or on their cell phones and that kind of thing. Well, that was unheard of in my time. You know, most children had a sheep or goat to look after. You know, that was your responsibility. You take it out early for the morning. You take water to it. and you bring them back home on evenings, you know. So those, I did a lot. I did that. My elder brother, my two older brothers actually, they would have to go up in the free hill and cut grass and bring it home for the cows and sheep, right? So yeah, I would say it was a farming community. Some did it to a greater degree than others. I would wake up in the morning. I was older then, but I would wake up in the morning and I would take the sheep out because we had some land around us. So I would go and take them out, not far from the house really, in a cartwheel where they had a lot of grass and that kind of thing. I would tie them out, come home, shower and get ready for school, go to school, and then on the evenings, I'd generally be home around 4:30, 5 o'clock, go home, change my clothes, go and get them, bring them in, and put them in the pen. I remember we had some goats. I would milk the goats, right? I would milk the goat. I remember having to do that as a schoolboy, yeah, in secondary school. I never had to go and cut grass like my older brothers. By the time I came of age to do that, my father had gotten rid of cows and that kind of thing, right? But I remember washing out the pig pen as a youngster, feeding them. So I had chores to do. I mean, I didn't look at it as anything significant. It was just the things that you had to do. And as I said, that taught you responsibility from a very early age. So, most of us learn how to take care of ourselves relatively early. You had to. In a large family, parents couldn't do everything, so the older ones would show the younger ones would look after the younger ones and show them what they needed to do. So that I had a lot of that experience. So you had to learn to take care of yourself pretty fast, right? So yeah.
Memories of boyhood days and the evolving community unfold.
Primary school was Bell Plain. Well, it was called St. Andrew's Boys. I remember going there as, I think it was around 5. And my mother was taking me there, and I objected, I resisted, because here it is, I spent all my early years at home. And then suddenly I'm being taken to school in a completely new environment, don't know anybody. But I went to St. Andrew's Boys. I spent about 2 years there, 2-3 years. And then I transitioned to boarding. The secondary school was the Aline. Didn't like school, believe it or not. Didn't like the formal thing of education. And it's ironic because I spent a lot of time in formal education. But my early years in school wasn't, I didn't like the formal setting, right? I enjoyed the free periods, lunchtime, going outside and playing with my friends, but sitting down in a classroom, didn't like that. But I made a few lifelong friends there. Unfortunately, some of them have passed. Actually, I find now that I'm getting a little bit older, a lot of the people who I grew up with have passed. But school, I learned quite a few valuable lessons. You know, who are your friends? Who aren't your friends? In those days, people had a lot of children. Like I said, I'm the youngest of 9. Most people had at least 5 children. But what has happened is that there has been a steady decline in the population in St. Andrew. Right? People have moved out. People migrated. So and people are not having as many children as they did before. So obviously you wouldn't need as many schools. So there's been a general decline in an amalgamation of the primary school, right? So Belplain is served, and the surrounding areas are served by St. Andrew's Composite. That's the name now, and that's unfortunately that's the way it is, right? There has been an upward migration from rural areas to more urban areas. Suburbia has grown over time. People have had difficulty with transportation in St. Andrew, so they've moved closer to the urbanized areas. Like myself, I got married and I moved out. But I think most of it had to do with younger people moving into the middle class and going into what we call the heights and the terraces mainly. I think that is the main reason why people have left.
This is where Beijing euphemisms come alive. Edward recalls some of the more entertaining forms of socializing in the area.
There was a chap we used to call him Panama. I never knew his real name, but he was one of the effort to use the euphemism a silverman. He worked in Panama. I don't know, I'm not sure if he worked in construction or whatever, but I knew he was there for some period of time and he came back to Barbados. So he was a little bit eccentric. You had your fellas that love their alcohol a little bit more than usual, you know, and on evenings, particularly Friday evenings, you'll see a few of them trying to walk home. I call it, they would be stumbling home, going from one side of the road to the next. You couldn't do that now. You get run over, right? Didn't have many cars back then. But yeah, Friday evenings, fellas just get paid at the plantation, because I came along at a time when the plantations were still one of the main areas of employment for a lot of Barbadians, right, in rural Barbados. So they would get paid on Fridays because they would be weekly paid. So the first place they will head is the rum shop. And I had about two. My father had one at the time, but when it came along, I had closed by then. But the rum shop was the place to go. And the fellas would be knocking back, you know, a few pints of rum, you know, and they were generally loud, noisy, boisterous, a lot of arguments, you know. And by, I would say, probably about 7, 8 o'clock, the fellas would be stumbling home, you know. And to use the Beijing euphemism, they'd be tight as a drum. You know, tight, tight, tight. So I grew up seeing a lot of that, you know. Never got into the habit, but I saw it.
Pride and place. Edward takes us back to the Yuletide season and other celebrations where families were more closely connected and strict values were adhered to.
I always knew when Christmas was around, you know. House got garlanded, you know, you got decorations up, who helped put them up. Everybody helped, really. You know, the traditional Beijing Christmas, the pork, the ham, the cakes, the sorrel, the liquor, you know. It was and inviting people over. People would come and visit. We would have friends in St. Michael who would come and visit us. And one year, then we would do the reverse in the next year. Those were some good times as well. So it was, and there was always the visits from relatives, cousins, because people had big families back then. you had a lot of relatives, right? My father had about 5 brothers, 2 of whom lived in the immediate area, so we knew one another. Um, Sometimes my mother's sister-in-law, who's the wife of one of my uncles, would come and visit her. It was, as I said, there was a lot of connections, a lot of deep family connections and friendships. So you got to know a lot of people that way. You got to know who your relatives were. Um, you got to understand what your place was too, because when the adults are talking as a child, you keep your mouth shut. you know, Little children are to be seen and not heard. All of those things. So, there were sticklers for manners. You had to speak to your elders. You had to show respect. It's not like today, there are there's not that closeness. A lot of people have moved up from the rural communities and gone into areas where, they're basically strangers. So you don't get the house visits. You don't see children intermingling with one another, right? So, and most people are away from home during the daytime. I grew up in a household with a stay-at-home, well, for the most part, a stay-at-home mother, right? Most of my peers would have grown up with their mothers being at home while the fathers were out working, but that's not the case today. I mean, even my children, both me and their mother were at work during the day. We come home on evenings, right? But you don't have that sort of intermingling and intermeshing of people's lives like when I was growing up. So and it would account for a lot of what I would call some of the social breakdown in society. One thing I do remember around independence time, took bands would go from house to house, and you would hear, you remember Punka's took band rhythm? That's the chorus. That's the first time I heard that chorus sung as a small boy. You would see guys come around in dresses. Dresses on wearing donkeys, effigies of donkeys. That was a lot of fun, man. Music was good. And I remember asking my mother, what is he saying? And she told me what we say, Ekido, here I stand, open your window, listen to the band, right? She gave me the whole thing, right? So around independence, it wasn't done at Independence and my Mother's Day, it was done around November 5th, Guy Fawkes Day, right? So you will have but it transitioned into Independence Day, the Independence Day festivities. But I don't see a lot of that now. And you see them when tourists come in and that kind of thing, but you don't see them in communities anymore, right? At least I don't.
We return to those euphemisms from back in the day.
I know a few. I mean, you grew up with parents who were a bit older, from rural Barbados. Yeah, you would hear a few Beijing sayings, you would know what they meant, nobody had to tell you. So yeah, when I try to pass on that knowledge to my children, but I find that a lot of the old Beijing sayings are not, there are a lot of younger Bajans don't know because they didn't grow up with a grandmother from the country. And I find, even though people have written books about them, I find people don't read as much. And so you wouldn't necessarily know them.
What are some of these sayings? Because I've already heard at least 2 or 3. What are some of these sayings that
or you look at a young lady and tell she that she look like Liquor by Lover. And she look at you like, what's that you said, Skipper? I say you look like Liquor by Lover. Or what that mean? It means you look good. You look like sugar, you sweet. They don't. I never heard that before. And then they're like at a loss. I mean, that was something that was regularly said in the village, you know. Or you know what party shot at, you work for party shot at. People don't understand what that means, you know. It means that you're good for nothing, you're worthless, you know. So a lot of these things, a lot of these euphemisms, we've forgotten. And I think it's sad because these are the things that make us uniquely Beijing. And we should try as far as possible to preserve them. It's what makes us who we are. And because I find now a lot of country areas, things have changed, you know. You could tell urban Barbados from rural Barbados when I was a youngster, but it's not as clear cut now as it used to be. And people have more transportation, they have cars, they can get around a little bit more. And we're more exposed to news from the outside world and music. What they call the cultural penetration is sort of like diluting what makes us unique. And it would be a pity if we lost that. I mean, things change over time, you know. But that part that makes us Barbadians, we should never ever lose that.
Our forefathers toiled this land. They toiled it with love and they toiled it tirelessly, never really getting to enjoy the beauty that is around them. The descendants thereof, however, have come to not only embrace and love this land, this community here in Walkers in St. Andrew, but they've come to make it home. They've come to develop it. They've come to make it even better than it was before. But still, rural country will always be rural country. And that's why Walkers is still a rural part of this community. Join us as we continue to traverse across St. Andrew, where the length and breadth of toil is seen in the successes of many, many descendants to come.